right, today we are doing a little twist on a legislative update. Joining me today is the executive director of the Make Liberty Win PAC, Barrett Young. Barrett, how you doing?
It is a pleasure to be here, Eric, here in Texas, the sovereign independent state of Texas. All is well.
Yeah, I think you got me out beat there. I'm in Minnesota, or Commie Soda, as we, lovingly refer to it as. But um, there's been some exciting primaries. Primary season has started. So I believe the Make Liberty Win PAC has been playing in some races out there and having some success. And we thought it'd be fun to talk about. What are you guys up to? So what has happened recently across the country? I think Texas, Arkansas, and like North Carolina just had primaries, right?
Yeah, so in aggregate, so far this year, we're 24-5. We'll take that win record anytime. But, there's been a lot of interesting things going on
Yeah.
across the country to start the year because we don't just have regularly scheduled primaries, but we also have a number of special elections that have been popping up really all across the country, from Georgia to New Hampshire to Pennsylvania. These special elections have added a little spice to the calendar. So
Yeah.
our first election night of the year was the shared election night with North Carolina, Arkansas, Texas. Big picture here is we went undefeated in Texas and Arkansas, and we took out the Senate president in North Carolina. So I'm sure we'll
Nice.
want to drill more in depth on that. But just to give the broad scope here, we then had special elections in Georgia and New Hampshire the next week. Then we had a special election just this week in
Yeah.
Pennsylvania. Then there'll be a 1 week break, but don't you worry. The Arkansas runoffs happen the next week.
Love
So
it.
we are busy. We are off to the races. So far, we've already committed to engage in 130 races across the
Wow.
country. So we're already either done with some of those or actively spending money in 130 races. So
Yeah. Let
I'm
me
looking
ask you this. So the Make Liberty Win PAC, like what is the mission? What drives the Make Liberty Win PAC?
Yeah, so Make Liberty Win and Young Americans for Liberty and Liberty Action, we all have a shared vision. And so Make Liberty Win, our focus specifically is to take over state legislatures for liberty by winning primarily in Republican primaries. And
Mhm.
so obviously that synergizes very well with our partner organizations. It's great for Young Americans for Liberty and Liberty Action as they build lighthouse states. It's great for all the single issue groups that want to pass legislation as we take out all the blocks to every bill they've got. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Now, when we're really looking at a state, we're looking for states where our dollar can go further. And so
Mhm.
while we love to help out and defend good people in places like Texas, and while we love to do really cool things like take out the Senate president of North Carolina,
Yeah.
these big red states, these purple states, those really are our bread and butter. It's places like West Virginia, Wyoming, Montana. These are the types of places where we can make the biggest impact. And as we kind of talk through the long term time horizon of the year, I think you'll see that's where most of our money, most of our focus is.
What's been the pushback? So obviously there are we'll call them Republicans, I suppose, but there's an establishment, a political establishment, and really, I mean, every single political party in my mind has division within the party. And the history of political parties, you got the people who want the power, and then you got the people in these party units that actually want to achieve something. What kind of pushback do you get from the apparatus, the establishment out there?
Yeah, it's really interesting because there is such a huge difference between the federal establishment that you deal with in Congress and the state level establishment. And, we're involved in Congressman Massey's race. And obviously, the reason he's getting whack a mole is foreign policy. Well, guess what? State reps, state senators, they're really not dealing with that, right? They're
Yeah.
not deciding whether or not to send aid to Israel. They're not deciding whether or not to bomb natural gas fields in the Middle East.
Yeah.
What they are deciding, however, is the majority of the decisions that affect people's day-to-day lives.
For sure.
And we have in the American system this beautiful diffusion of power where the state governments, even though the feds are terrible and they violate state rights, they still make the majority of the decisions, especially if you are owning a business or you are dependent upon welfare,
Yep.
corporate or otherwise. And so the pushback is usually in the form of a few different groups. But in safe red states, it's mostly corporate PACs and public sector employees. So think your teachers, your police, your
Yeah.
firefighters, and their respective unions, and then all of the various corporate PACs that really want to, get their slice of the pie. And the really insidious thing is, we'll talk about this in depth when we talk about West Virginia, especially, but it's often these hospital associations that are the establishment in these states.
Huh.
These hospital associations are often some of the top donors to the party in each state, especially in red states. And of course, hospitals are huge employers. Pretty much everybody has met somebody whose mom was a nurse. Okay. A lot
Yeah.
of people watching this are probably married to a nurse. So we all understand that when you talk about big employers, healthcare is where it's at.
Yeah.
Healthcare, public schools, those employ a lot of people and therefore represent a large interest group. But the people who run those hospitals, the people who are high ranking employees, they get paid a lot of money. And with
Yeah.
that money they get paid, they put it into PACs, they put it into associations, and then they lobby the state government, they give money to candidates. And so one of the things that hospitals do that's just, this is econ 101. I mean, you'd have to be completely illiterate to not realize what they're doing, is they'll literally create monopolies for themselves through certificate of need. And
Yeah.
so when you're in a state, if you're somebody who's a conservative or a libertarian, somebody who actually believes in free markets, the first thing you're going to realize is, oh, a lot of the big bad government regulation, a lot of the money in this bloated budget, the reason we expanded Medicare and Medicaid, the reason we keep making Obamacare bigger and bigger in this state, oh, it's it's the hospital association. They're giving
Yeah.
money to everybody. And then if you're
Yeah.
a social conservative, oftentimes it's also the hospital association who is driving things like transing the kids, the puberty blockers. They make money
Yeah.
on that. On an individual freedom level, it's the mask mandates, the vax mandates. Guess
Yes.
what? It pays to give out vaccines. It's one of the few drugs where they can literally pay a bounty to doctors to prescribe. So guess
Yeah.
what? Doctors love when that bounty is guaranteed by law. They want to make sure every little kid before they go to their public school gets that jab. They want to mandate it
Right.
for the private schools. If they had their way, the homeschoolers would do it too, right? So that's kind of what we're up against. And that's just one example. But really, you start looking across these big industries, especially industries where they're relying on government aid or they're relying on government regulation to crush their competition.
Yeah.
Certificate of need is obvious. It's literally saying you can't open another hospital to compete with mine. I am the robber baron of healthcare. Like that is obvious. But there's a
Yeah.
lot
It's
more subtle regulations meant to make it impossible or cost prohibitive to comply with them. It's easy for, a big company to lose $10,000, $20,000 a pop to a regulation. They would rather not have to do it. But if the payoff is that there's a bunch of little guys just starting out who can't pay that, so then they get a larger market share, therefore they make more money than the regulation costs them. Oh, that's what they're looking to do. So that's
right.
often what we're up against is a establishment class of politicians who are funded by corporate PACs and oftentimes are also given muscle from the unions, the public sector unions, especially police, fire, teacher. Like that's what you're usually going up against in a red state.
I love that you pointed that out because I was talking about this during the vaccine mandates of what 3, 4, 5 years ago, and would couch this when I served in the legislature to say, how amazing would it be if you're a business owner? I used to have my own small business. When the government can come in and mandate that people buy your service, buy your product, and then also shield you from liability associated with that product. What a business
I
plan. That'd be amazing. You must buy it, but hey, you hold me harmless. I have no liability. It's nuts.
And you know this, Eric, it's no longer just vaccines. They're doing this for pesticides now. This is the hot bill all across the country right now. It was a hot bill last session and it's heating up this session everywhere you look. Glyphosate. We had this whole MAHA thing happening in Washington. Then we have the state legislatures. They're trying to make it to where, oh, yeah, sorry, farmer, you got cancer from pesticide. Well, we're special producers. We're special producers, you see. Or as the federal government's now saying, you are vital to national security. Therefore, you may poison people at will. There's no way for you to have recourse criminally or civilly because we are a favored manufacturer, my friend.
Yeah, but we're a free country. We're in a free country, right? People say.
All
Um,
people are equal before the law, I
yeah,
swear.
yes. So I want to ask you about this. So the Senate president in North Carolina, last I heard, there was going to be a recount. Has that happened?
That has not happened.
Okay.
And I'm going to give you a very blunt answer. This is going to take months for them
Yeah.
to do this recount. it's going to be tied up in the courts. There's a very similar situation we encountered in 2024, Jamie Walsh versus Mike Cabell in Pennsylvania. And the reason I bring it up is that both Pennsylvania and North Carolina are swing states. So one of the things you got to understand is this may seem like this is just a state ledge contest. How does that matter that it's a presidential and congressional swing state? Well, because the precedents for ballot counting in these races determine the precedents for November. And so in the Cabell Walsh recount, the reason it was going to the state Supreme Court, the reason there were so many rounds of appeals, and it ended up becoming this huge legal battle, is there were people who wanted a certain rule for counting the ballots that would benefit a certain party come November. And so in the case of the Phil Berger race, he started out down 2 votes, the Senate president. They then did what they call curing the provisional ballots, basically counting and figuring out which provisional ballots were legitimate. And he was now down by over 20 votes. Now, usually a recount is not going to move 20 votes, believe it or not in a race of that size. 20 votes is actually a lot to move. In the Cabell Walsh race, it was 9 votes, a much closer margin. So, and those that did not really move after rounds and rounds of legal litigation. So the problem that we're seeing in this race already is the state's, election czar equivalent is somebody who campaigned for Phil Berger. The county government in his home county is obviously in bed with him. And so we're now seeing all sorts of random lawsuits, voter intimidation lawsuits, because, his opponent, Sam Page, was a sheriff. And you know how it is. Every time we have an election, what do Democrats say? Oh, there were police at the polls. That's racist voter intimidation. Well, we now have Republicans basically doing the same thing in this race. So it's going to be really interesting because there's going to be multiple separate strands of litigation. But I think that we can all look at what's going on and say with certainty, Sam Page won, Phil Berger lost, the people of that district spoke. Now it's a question of whether the government through legal warfare is going to undo the democratic will of the people.
Yeah, I can't wait to see those results because I remember, the Senate president was down by 2, and then I just looked at the results again recently, and I saw it was closer to 20 now. And I don't know if you recall this, but back in 2012, was it the Al Franken Norm Coleman race in my home state, Minnesota, where Norm Coleman was up like hundreds of votes, but then they started finding ballots for Al Franken in the trunks of cars, and every single ballot happened to be a vote for Al Franken. So they hundreds of votes difference ended up flipping, and I think Al Franken ended up winning by hundreds of votes. So I'm really curious how this thing shapes out.
Well, your home state of Minnesota has an even more recent, and I would argue egregious example in the district. Minnesota state ledge contests. There were 2 races, the most high profile one being Dan Waldemott's race. Dan is a drunk who's been, he's had some troubles getting caught drinking in parking lots, but he's also a high ranking member of Democrat leadership. And it was discovered they had just lost a bunch of ballots mysteriously. And when Republicans said, well, that's awful fishy, we need to do something about that. This race was so close that you can't just have lost ballots. The courts went, but the Democrat won, you see. So we got
I love that example, and I think I know where you're going for the next one, which is right here in my home district. But we call him DWI Dan. Dan Walgamot went to a liquor store, bought a bottle of vodka. There's video footage. I'm not making this up. I wish I knew we were talking about this because I've got the video footage from the liquor store. He walks out to the parking lot, pops open his trunk while he's still at the liquor store, unscrews the bottle, takes a big swig of vodka, puts it in his trunk, and drives off, and got a Dewey for it. So
we won a bunch of awards at the Reed Awards and Polly's for this, but it was literally a shape mailer that was a giant vodka bottle. So the mailer was in the shape of the vodka bottle. It was titled Walgamott's Wonderful Vodka. We sent it. It was beautiful. Won a bunch of awards for it. I have a copy of it somewhere.
Okay. Oh, I need a copy of that. That's brilliant. Yeah, you guys do, the Make Liberty Win PAC here, some amazing mailers. In fact, I just talked to a primary winner in Texas yesterday. I'm trying to think the name. I guess it doesn't matter, but asked him for some feedback on what happened with this cycle and with the Make Liberty Win PAC and what you guys all did. And And he said he loved the literature pieces that went out, and he said they were hilarious, they're witty, or most campaign literature pieces tend to be quite dry or boring or repetitive. So I love that you guys get that creative. So tell us about the other race that I think you're alluding to in Minnesota.
Yeah. So for those people watching who don't know, Eric here used to be a member of the Minnesota State Legislature. He had a ping pong combative relationship with Brad Tapke. Now, Brad Tapke, he is what he is. He is a Democrat. I mean, maybe you could say he's not the worst Democrat in the world, but as Eric can tell you, if we're trying to accuse a Minnesota Democrat of being moderate, we're really going into some nitpicky and questionable, analysis.
Yeah.
So Brad Tapke, he runs for reelection. Neither candidate gets 50% of the vote. Now, in other states, particularly down south, even in a general election, no candidate gets 50% of the vote. We go to a runoff. But no, no, no. The final tally is 49.9 to 49.9. Okay. 10,973 votes for Tapke, 10,959 votes for Aaron Paul. Much like the Walgamot race, all sorts of shady business going on. Do the courts remedy this in any way? Is there a redo? Is there a meaningful attempt to figure out what was really going on?
Yeah.
No. Because the Dems had already lost their trifecta due to us getting it to be a tie in the House, and they sure were not going to give Republicans a majority. But then again, look at it this way. This is the sad thing. Look at what Republican leadership has done with their tie. It maybe wouldn't have mattered if those two seats flipped, because they may have done the same thing they've already been doing, which is giving the Democrats everything they want.
Yeah, that Tapke situation, after it all was said and done, I think he ended up winning by 14 votes, I want to say. But the county, my home county, Scott County, said that they threw away, I think, 36 votes.
I think it's possible that Minnesota Republicans in the establishment are just so used to losing that the idea of having a majority scared them, because then they realized that there would be primaries in 2026 where they have to answer for the fact that they vote like Democrats.
Yes, I totally agree. I think they're scared to death of actually having a governing majority here in my home state. So what are some of the highlights within Texas or in Arkansas that you want to talk about?
Well, Texas and Arkansas are pretty straightforward states. In both cases, all we were doing were defending existing incumbents. So there was no expansion of like the Liberty bench. In Texas, it was about defense. And, in Texas, the big thing was there was this weird Chinese casino company that wanted to come into the state, get a monopoly on casinos. It's tied to a bunch of existing state reps and their families. And so they made a push in the Texas ledge, and it looked like, oh, well, they failed. All of the Liberty people were to blame because they didn't want to give people a monopoly, especially not just out of state, out of country company, a monopoly on gambling in the state of Texas. And there was all this talk of, oh, we're gonna go and we're gonna beat them. And then the other thing, of course, is the tort reform group, in Texas, used to be conservative, at least a little. Now it's just the establishment hobby horse. They were mad about things like we were talking about earlier, these good Liberty people voting against giving people all these legal immunities and creating a two-tier justice system where if you're a political donor, you are exempt from any kind of lawsuit on your products. But if you are a small business owner, medium business owner, normal guy, well, guess what? You can get sued just the same. So there was all this talk of, oh, yeah, this is going to happen. They're going to come down. But two things happened. One, we got involved, helped deter that investment because they knew that if they really went in, they'd have to deal with us. But then the second thing that just was an environmental factor that works in our favor is these people absolutely hate Ken Paxton. And Ken Paxton, he's the Attorney General of Texas. He is running for U.S. Senate. And so some of their fire was focused on punishing Ken Paxton for being a fair AG. Unlike a lot of past Texas AGs, Ken Paxton actually enforces the law on corporate political donors to the GOP, the same as he does anybody else. And because he was running for U.S. Senate, not only do they want to punish him, but they have a very, very competitive attorney general race that's now gone to a runoff. and they want to make sure that they aren't stuck with Ken Paxton 2.0. And so between our own deterrence and us getting lucky that Ken Paxton was public enemy number one and, kind of scrambling everybody's focus, Texas was pretty straightforward. Now in Arkansas, the Liberty bench in Arkansas is smaller. Unfortunately,
Mhm.
Arkansas is one of those states where historically there really just isn't that much of a liberty movement there. But we were able to go in, reelect two representatives there, Wayne Long and Cameron Cooper. And, in the runoff, we have the opportunity to elect Rivet there. So we're looking forward to hoping, maybe get a few more people in, build the bench slowly. We'll have a big expansion there. But frankly, even Texas has been better than Arkansas as far as, just building the liberty movement.
Yeah. So, and there's something that happens in Texas that I frankly didn't know was happening until just recently. And it feels like it's probably a part of the natural progression, as the mission of getting into these states and make liberty win, helping great liberty candidates get into office. So as the liberty wings start to grow in these states, like you can see it happening in Texas, the Republican establishment, instead of kind of locking arms with these liberty legislators and unifying is one of their favorite words they like to use, is we should be unified. They end up unifying with Democrats, and they create a coalition with Democrats, and they start giving Democrats committee chairs or co-chairs, and they empower you would typically consider their political opposition instead of locking arms with the Liberty wing in the Republican ranks. Is that kind of a fair statement? You're in Texas. Is that what's happening?
So Texas is really interesting because Texas has some unique local variables. They have a long-standing tradition of having Democrat chairs going back to when the party realignment was happening. This was essentially a way for the Republicans to make their lives a little easier when Texas was much more of a jump ball state. As we all heard the story, Southern Democrats start becoming Southern Republicans. There's that awkward middle period where it's all messy. This is a relic of that messiness. The problem is, though, Texas has a very right wing primary electorate relative to a lot of states. And so people were getting sick and tired of that sort of nonsense. Now, here's the issue. If you try to take away the toys the Democrats have had, the Democrats are, of course, going to do anything in their power to keep those toys. And what we see time and time again, because this isn't just Texas, this is Alaska,
Yeah.
this is Ohio, and
Mhm.
something very similar played out in Montana as well this
Yep.
last session. The Republican establishment is built upon a lie. The lie is that we do everything for the party. We have no ideology. We have no agenda but the victory of the party.
Yes.
But as soon as the party in a Republican supermajority state has a majority of the caucus as people with actual beliefs, you quickly realize it's never been about the party. They will vote with Democrats. They will do all sorts of things. So in Ohio, you had the blue 22. 22 Republicans vote with the Democrats to elect the heir to this corrupt guy who's in federal prison for corruption from an energy company. But no, we got to get his heir in. We got to get him in. And so Jason Stevens comes in. We walloped them in 2024 on the PAC side, took Jason Stevens' gavel that way. That's the hard way to take away a gavel, by the way. It's much easier to beat them head to head. If you got to win 20 races, even if they're 20 easier races, much easier to do that than, much harder to do 20 easy races than win one very hard race. It's just the way it goes, law of averages, blah, blah, blah. But, Ohio, that was a great example. Alaska has been living under the tyranny of this weird system where Republicans get elected as Republicans and just shamelessly join the Democrat caucus. Like, that's a big issue for the folks up in Alaska. Alaska looks like a red state, yet they had a Democrat congressperson, yet they have this weird stuff in the state legislature. Alaska is a purple state. It's just nobody realizes it because they voted for Trump so by such a large margin. And then you have places like Texas where you have this long-standing tradition of we're going to be moderate pukes. We're going to give Democrats committee chairmanship, something unheard of in most states, to give the minority party committee chairmanship authority. But they have this stupid tradition. They hold on to this stupid tradition
Huh.
Finally, conservatives get enough of a voice in the legislature say, we're done with that stupid tradition. And look, the speaker that they elected in the Republican caucus was not like some like conservative firebrand. They just elected a normie, just normal milk toast Republican squishy guy, but he would have removed the committee chair. So what do? They storm out of the caucus vote and protest, break the party rules, break the caucus rules, go vote with the Democrats, and now we've got Dustin Burrows. And look, we played a big part in driving Dave Phelan out of the speaker's gavel, but you saw what happened once Dave Phelan was gone. The good thing about that was it exposed the Texas Republicans. With Dave Phelan, Dave was able to actually rally the Republican votes to be speaker. But once he was driven to a runoff, once a lot of his cronies lost after being bad on school choice, that was one of the big catalysts there.
Mm.
Then you were in a spot where it was like, okay, Dustin Burrows takes over, and Dustin Burrows is trying to play both sides. Objectively, I mean, he is better than Dave Phelan, but what do we teach people all the time? I've taught it at trainings, you've taught it at trainings, everybody teaches at trainings who actually understands politics. Politics is not the lesser of two evils. You don't go, yay, we moved from Dave Phelan, who is 100% horrible, to Dustin Burrows, who is 98.8% horrible.
Right.
This is a huge victory for the party.
Yep.
No, but what it is a huge victory on is you have moved the political environment. The political environment has shifted to where a majority of the Republican caucus is willing to vote against Democrat chairmanships. You've shifted the political environment to where the majority of the Republican caucus is willing to take a stand to the establishment that has been this weird uniparty Republicans, Democrats, we all share power nonsense. So, I guess what I'm trying to illustrate is, while yes, it is not a complete victory when you remove somebody like Dave Phelan and you get Dustin Burrows. It is still a victory, though, because you've shifted the political environment and you've made it possible to pass new, more extreme pieces of legislation, and you've made it possible to really start making moves to get that gavel, to get in a spot where you take out enough Republicans in the primary that it doesn't matter that the Democrats vote with the rhinos. There's not enough rhinos left.
I love that. I was just talking to a legislator in Utah today about that. A new Hazlitt member, Tiara Ogzier, and kind of like casting out, well, this is the vision, this is the mission, and it is control the political environment and you control the politicians. And it's not an easy lift. It could take years of work, but the more you can control that political environment, the more predictable the politicians become. And their excuse of the political reality is I can't do it. Well, that's where we exert influence on what is the political reality. So I love that you're talking about that. So what other big things does Make Liberty Win PAC have going on right now? I know Thomas Massey's got, it sounds like, a fairly difficult primary challenge ahead of him. You guys are involved in that, aren't you?
Yeah. So when it comes to Congressman Massey, if you kind of look at a calendar for Make Liberty Win, we've got the West Virginia primary on May 12th. That's really big. Yeah. You have Thomas Massey's race on the 19th. That's very big. You've got Montana primary on June 2nd. That's really big. And then you jump all the way into August for the Wyoming primary, which is going to be very big as well. Focusing on Congressman Massey, we already have knocked on with door knockers. And by the way, these door knockers are YAL activists. They work for us here at Make Liberty Win, but they're YAL activists. They're knocking doors. And they've knocked on over 100,000 doors for Congressman Massey to date. Here is the picture of one of our door knockers, Mr. Conyers, knocking door number 100,000 for Congressman Massey in that district. And our goal is to knock at minimum 250,000 doors in aggregate, but we're going to try to hit 300,000. And, we're obviously actively trying to raise the funds, do the right things to execute a world-class door program to get us there. But that is the goal. And we're supplementing those doors with a massive non-door program as well. We started out with a goal to raise 1.5 million for the Thomas Massey effort. We raised very, very close to that. And so, now we're actually going to expand the goal to 2 million. And so we are really trying to, at Make Liberty Win, ensure that this is a victory. And the reason is that this is the race of the cycle in the primary. So I'm going to give you guys, I don't have a crystal ball, but I think I'm going to be pretty accurate in saying this. We're going to lose the majority in the U.S. House of
Yeah.
Representatives in November. And so these general election races, they become much less meaningful when you know the outcome. So when we want to talk about the most important federal elections, you have essentially two. You have the Texas U.S. Senate primary, Ken Paxton versus John Cornyn, and you have Thomas Massie versus Ed Galrain in a random person who shouldn't have filed. But it's good for us they filed because it splits the anti-incumbent vote.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about the Massie race is a referendum on American foreign policy.
Yep.
The reason Congressman Massie has all of this money spent against him, it is not because he is better on economics than the president, though he is. It is not because he's voted against the budget, though he has, and he should every time, as should everyone in Congress.
Yep.
The reason Congressman Massie has a challenger is that he has been a consistent opponent to foreign aid and foreign military intervention, and that enrages the Israel lobby. And so, as we've seen, the Trump of 2024, the Trump of 2016 on the campaign trail, and even in the White House from 2016 to 2020, is not the same President Donald J. Trump that we have now.
Yep.
And the President Donald J. Trump we have now has embroiled us in a war in Iran. We're playing banana republic dominoes. We're just going to randomly kidnap foreign leaders and have a good time. And look, you know, I'll be honest with you. It's funny seeing a guy like Nicolas Maduro in prison, okay? I love the photo. He's got the headphones on, the glasses. I mean, it just looks baller. I understand. I understand what, as people like to say, the aura of it, okay? I understand that. But what's the end game?
Yeah.
We have the president tweeting about making Venezuela the 51st state. I don't know about you, but I thought that the whole MAGA thing was we wanted to reduce immigration. I don't think that annexing a country full of people you had previously been trying to deport makes a lot of sense if that was the big goal. And also, you know, if you were going to sell it to me as, oh, well, we're going to steal the Venezuelans' oil. Well, at least then it's like, okay, maybe we can have a moral discussion, but hey, I like oil, you like oil, we can have that conversation.
Right.
But instead, what are we going to do? We're going to run Venezuela. What does that even mean? So
I know. I threw out.
Stands up to the Venezuela war. Massie stands up to the Israeli aid. He stands up to the initial Iran strikes. He stands up to the second round of Iran strikes. And so he's got this huge target on his back. You know, the Republican Jewish Coalition, they just dropped 3 million into the race. Right now, if you look at the race, the most recent I saw is that if you add up what's been reported, Team Galrain, you add up the negative attacks against Massie, positive Galrain ads, Galrain's own fundraising, you get about 8.7 million. You add up the Massie side, it's more like 6. Now, here's the thing. That is going to look a lot worse once we get the Q1 reports. That's going to look a lot worse as time drags on. And so, you know, look, Massie's getting outspent by millions of dollars right now.
Yeah.
But he is going to get outspent by so much more as the race goes on, because what is going to happen is as we get closer and closer to election, they're going to be spending more and more and more on negative attack ads on Massie, which means that even if Massie is ultimately predetermined to win, it turns out his floor of support is north of 50% in the district, and they can't dislodge him. What they're going to see in those polls are shrinking margins. Yeah. They're going to see the effects of their negative political campaigning. And as a result, they're going to pour more and more money in. And so that's why at Make Liberty Win, we're trying to win where we can. Yeah. We cannot outspend them on television. Yeah. There's going to be a TV war. Team Massey's going to lose it because the other side has so much money. And you know how it is with these federal level political consultants. They're kind of lazy. They love the good profit margins of TV. You know, remember, the bad guys have problems too. Their problem is it's kind of a corrupt, incestuous system, right? And so, everybody is paying this weird loop of consultants that all have shared employees and whatnot. And it becomes a whole ordeal, right? So the good
Hmm.
news is they'll be lazy. They'll dump all this money into TV. And that means that we can win at the door. I believe you guys have a program. It's
Right.
called Operation Win at the Door. But that's the idea. We can win at the door. We can
Yeah.
actually win that front of the battle. We can win at the mailbox. We can win on the phones. And, while we can't beat them with TV and digital outright, like we can't outspend them, we can
Yeah.
out efficiency them. We can
Yeah.
choose to be much more targeted in our approach. We can choose to, really try to get message penetration on the right people rather than doing these broad-based mass communications. And so
Yeah.
that's what we're trying to do on our end. I'm sure that, if you were to ask Congressman Massey's campaign, they would probably tell you something very similar, but that's where we're at as far as Congressman Massey. It is going to be a dogfight. He
Yeah.
is public enemy number one of the establishment. He's public
Yep.
enemy number one of the deep state, which is like the establishment beyond the establishment.
Yep.
So it's going to be a tough race, but I'm feeling kind of optimistic. I think with the amount of doors that we're knocking, with the amount of stuff that's happening, he's got a chance. When normally in a race when he's going to get outspent as much as he is, there should be zero chance. I think we do have a chance.
So you're going to offer a prediction?
My prediction.
Okay.
My prediction is we'll call it a aspirational prediction. My prediction is Massey by 2.
Oh, okay. I'm jotting this down.
That should tell you something about that being my aspirational.
Yeah, I got you. Okay. Yeah, you mentioned Venezuela, and I don't know if you watched the World Baseball Classic. I had never watched it before. I don't even know if they even did it in the past, but in the final game a couple nights ago, it was USA versus Venezuela, and I kind of jokingly threw out on social media, "It's USA versus USA. We can't lose. Are you sick of winning yet?" Because apparently we oversee Venezuela now. But so what about you? You talked about West Virginia. It sounds like you want to talk about West Virginia a bit, because that is, I think, a very ripe state, and I think there's a lot of candidates flowing into West Virginia. What's that going to look like?
So West Virginia, I mean, there's so many angles to talk about here. So we're going to be involved on the PAC side here in 43 races in West Virginia.
Wow.
Now, I want to really put this in context for people, because, people don't necessarily understand, well, how big is the state legislature? What does 43 races really mean? Well, we're involved in every single contested state Senate primary in the state. So every single race for state Senate where there's more than one person filed, we're in it. We're in a supermajority, well, over a supermajority, but a supermajority of contested House primaries. And what that adds up to is we're contesting 47% of the chamber that is the West Virginia State Senate. We are contesting 26% of the chamber that is the West Virginia House of Delegates.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you start thinking about an aggregate. That means that we're contesting about a third of the entire legislature. And then when you want to go even more specific to the Republican caucus, we're very close to engaging in half of the Republican caucus. So there's the opportunity for a huge shift here in the legislature. The way to think about it is even if we were to only win half of our races, that's a potential shift of a quarter of the GOP caucus just in the state, which is crazy in terms, and that's in terms of voting power. Obviously, in the House, there are more people. Okay, so if you wanted to do by the number of humans, that wouldn't be the case. But in terms of voting power, because of the Senate, that's how it breaks out. And what this is it's a civil war between different factions of the GOP, and we are really a third faction. Okay, but there is one faction in this GOP civil war where the goal is to annihilate them, to crush them. We're talking Conan the Barbarian level. Okay, destruction. And there's a reason for that. In 2024, Make Liberty Win got involved in West Virginia. We took out the Senate president. Fun fact, West Virginia is a weird state. If you're the Senate president, you're also the lieutenant governor. So we ousted the lieutenant governor. But the Senate president was a guy named Craig Blair. And he was somebody who, as Senate president, was able to kind of gel all of the establishment Republican factions together. But he had some lieutenants. One of those was a guy named Mike Maroney, who is the chair of the health committee. We'll take him out. There was another guy, Tom Takubo. Now, Tom, he was a part of the leadership team. he was somebody who was not up for election in 2024. They staggered their elections.
Yep.
And Tom, when Craig Blair was ousted, he was like, hey, why not me? I ought to be the Senate president. But he gets beat by a guy named Randy Smith because we had taken out a lot of the big kingmakers here in the Senate, which meant that that faction had lost strength. And so you might be asking, well, you're holding me in suspense. What's the faction? It's something we talked about earlier. It's the hospital associations.
Mm.
Tom Takubo is the West Virginia Hospital Association guy. Big shock. He himself is a doctor. Big shock. He himself is tied in with the medical association by marriage and all these other groups, right? So he is the king of this faction. That let's go through their legislative accomplishments and their votes, okay? Because it doesn't matter what type of right wing you are, they've done something to enrage you. So let's say you are a Maha person. Well, these are the vaccine guys.
Yep.
These are the people who voted to lock down your state. These are the reasons why West Virginia still has childhood vaccine laws that are more extreme than virtually all blue and purple states. Obviously, they're more extreme than the red states. Okay. They're more extreme than blue and purple states. They do not allow you to exercise your First Amendment religious freedom rights to waive out of a vaccine. You're not allowed a philosophical exemption. You're barely allowed medical exemptions. And this has become a court case because the legislature refused to pass anything to undo it. And the governor has tried to solve this by executive fiat. And it's just constant off, on as far as what are the rules for vaccines. And even if the governor's executive order was passed, by the way, even if the courts upheld it, it is not perfect. It is a very minimalist, vaccine exemption. So that, if you're a Maha person, should really pay attention to you. What if you're a fiscal conservative? Well, Medicare, Medicaid expansion.
Yep.
Well, certificate of need. Yep. Well, healthcare price transparency, all these terrible things. Okay, so what if you're a social conservative? Tom Takubo voted against banning abortion last session. Tom Takubo, every time child puberty blockers comes up, either just openly votes to keep kids on puberty blockers or introduces amendments to bills trying to stop that, to water them down and make them functionally useless. So when we're talking about this faction split, the West Virginia Hospital Association, that have historically been the kingmakers in the West Virginia state legislature, their king that they've crowned as this is our claimant, he's going to try to take the throne, is Tom Takubo. And he and all of his men are kind of in our crosshairs. So there are people who are currently in the West Virginia House of Delegates. There are people who are formally in the West Virginia House of Delegates. There's random doctors they've picked off the street to run in these state Senate primaries to oust good conservative senators and also to oust people where it's like, look, we actually don't think they're that great, but there's a reason they're being targeted. They're being targeted because they voted against Tom Takubo for Senate president. And so our goal is to finish the job. We want to cut off the head of the snake. We have a huge team of door knockers there in Tom Takubo's district. A great candidate is running against him. His name is Chris Pritt. Chris Pritt is somebody the folks at Young Americans for Liberty who pay close attention should know. He used to be a part of Young Americans for Liberty's Hazlitt Coalition. He was a great member of the House of Delegates. He ran for Senate against Eric Nelson and lost. Now he's running against Tom Takubo this cycle. But Tom Takubo is kind of the public enemy number one. But I don't want to get too lost in the sauce on the Senate, though, because the House, a lot of stuff going on in the House. The Speaker of the House, Roger Hanshaw, is truly a gift to us, I would say. Because sometimes we come across people who are evil, but they are smart. I can think of many examples. Idaho's Speaker of the House, Mike Moyle, evil guy, one of the most evil I've ever come across, but very smart. A worthy opponent, you might say.
Yeah.
Roger Hanshaw is not a worthy opponent. Let's talk about why Roger Hanshaw is
let's hear this.
But dumb. So Governor Patrick Morrisey, he's definitely one of the better Republican governors. We'll see how he interacts with a more conservative legislature. That'll be the real test, but we're cautiously optimistic. But he ran on repealing vaccines. And we, Make Liberty Win in 2024, had just ousted the Senate president and we had ousted Mike Maroney. So when he comes in, the Senate, they're pistol whipped. They're scared. They pass a clean vaccine mandate repeal bill. It goes to the House. Well, what happens in the House? Well, Eric, you were in the legislature. And since you were one of the naughty guys in the legislature who actually voted according to your principles that didn't just do what the speaker told you, you know how this
Yeah.
goes. What do? They threaten you. They do all these things. If they don't like a bill, they put it into committee to die. But
Yeah.
sometimes they like a bill, kind of. And what they want to do is they want to water it down.
Yeah.
So let's do Roger Hanshaw's brilliant plan to water down the governor and the Senate's vaccine repeal bill. Let's walk through step by step. Step one, send it to a committee where you appointed the committee chair. Oh, it didn't work. It died there. Okay. Step two. Okay. We don't like how it's doing. We're going to go back and forth. We're going to do some committee hopping. We're going to constantly edit and mess around with this bill. What we're going to do is we're going to create a special committee. And I'm going to get a lot of committee chairmen on it, a lot of committee vice chairs, and then Chris Anders there as a token affirmative action hire for the committee as an anti-vax guy. And we're going to put Chris Anders on that committee so I can say it's fair.
Yeah.
And what we're going to do is we're going to water down the bill. Okay, we're going to water down the bill. Cool. We're going to tell the few people who are at least not absolutely terrible, they're still not good, but not absolutely terrible. Hey, we need you to vote to remove the religious and philosophical exemption for this bill. So it will pass this committee that Hanshaw created, but then we'll go on the floor of the amendment back. And to their credit, they do kind of amend it back. The language is like this, but very clearly, Eric, if a speaker goes through all of this trouble and holds a vote for a piece of legislation, does the speaker want it to pass?
No.
Well, here's the thing. The speaker, he goes out. This is why he's really dumb. He goes through all this process, amending the bill. He puts it up. He tries to whip votes to get it to pass because now it's watered down. Now it's bad. Now it's weak.
Yeah.
Democrats, plus a bunch of the people who voted for it in that weird kill committee where they watered it down, plus a bunch of red Republicans, vote against it. The speaker voted for the bill. The speaker voted for the watered down bill. The speaker told people, vote for the watered down bill.
Yeah.
And he couldn't even control the chamber enough to pass it. So this is what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
You thought about this scenario like it was smart speaker. So what did you assume? The speaker wanted to kill the bill. That's why he went through all of this.
Yeah,
and when it comes
for sure.
to the floor, it'll be a mess. He'll vote against it. No, he voted for the bill.
Yeah.
So,
well, when they do that, that becomes obvious political cover. Water down the bill. They can say, I voted for the bill. See, it was over here. It did next to nothing. But that sounds like a political cover opportunity to me.
Except that he now exposed almost half of his caucus to a bad vaccine vote, either in the committee or on the floor. So again, this is why I'm saying he's not that smart. He's now given almost half of his caucus, that is the speaker, your job is to protect the caucus when they go to re-election.
Yeah.
That's the speaker's job. Yep. He's now given them multiple layers of bad vaccine votes. Okay. He's given that. That didn't have to be. It could have just been killed in committee.
Yeah.
That's all that had to be done. You did not need this. This is why I say sometimes the opposition is smart. Sometimes the opposition is dumb because you gave us a roll call vote just on the legislature. You gave us multiple layers of committee votes too, so that if anybody did try to cover their rear by voting right on final passage, we got you on the committee.
Yeah, normally that's like pulling teeth to try to get people to force a roll call vote that could be used later down the road. But it sounds like this speaker just said, here's a gift, make Liberty win, PAC.
Well, and he gave us a lot of other gifts. They voted to exempt themselves from FOIA. Think about how crazy that is.
Yeah.
The West Virginia legislature is like, well, we don't like that people can request our records. Oh man, you don't like that? So what are you going to do? Well, we've got a brilliant bill. Okay, here's the bill. We're going to exempt ourselves from FOIA records, if and only if, hey, there is an if, we create our own records release process. So instead of state law dictating the release rules for public records relevant to the legislature, they're going to just make their own rules via just, rule making. I think you've been there. You know how rule making in a legislative chamber goes. That's a nice way of saying, we will release the records the Speaker and the Senate President want released. No more, no less. Thank you very much. All right. And so they voted to do that. I mean, these people, what do you want me to say? You know how these rhinos go.
Yeah, it sounds like a target-rich environment in West Virginia. No wonder you're playing in a third of all the races in the legislature. Well, thank you for joining me today, Barrett. I appreciate it. If you are out there, you're watching this, and you're thinking, I want to be a part of this liberty movement. I'm sick and tired of this political establishment. You want to be the tip of the spear in your state, please go to libertyaction.us/candidate. And I'll say it again, go to libertyaction.us/candidate. You can fill out that form, alert us that you want to be the tip of the spear in your state, and we can walk your hand through the process, which involves doing a survey so we know where you're at on the issues, doing an interview with the Liberty Action team. And if everything looks great, then it's our role to recommend certain races and candidates to the Make Liberty Win PAC. So back to you, Barrett. Any parting comments that you think people should know about before we part ways here?
Sure. In closing, I just want to thank Young Americans for Liberty, Liberty Action. This is a team effort to retake the country. And I want everybody who's watching at home to really understand something. It can feel hopeless when you're looking at federal politics. You are going up against the CIA, you're going up against APAC, you're going up against all of the corporate lobbies, and that can be very daunting. But there's some good news. We can win at the state level. We literally, at Make Liberty win hundreds of elections every cycle, usually outspent, usually having governors and Senate presidents and speakers and all of these fancy schmancy people endorsing our opponents. If you go out there, if you knock doors, if you're willing to actually be aggressive, to bring the truth to the voters, which means going negative on incumbents, if you're willing to do those things, you can retake our country. So don't lose hope. Work with the folks at YAL, work with the folks at Liberty Action, work with us here at Make Liberty Win, and let's do it. Let's live up to the org's namesake and make liberty win.
Love it. Awesome. Thanks, Barrett. Appreciate it. We'll catch you guys later.